Welcome to Grid Talk. My name is George Howson, and today we are here to review the 2025 Bahrain Grand Prix. Joining me today, we have Grid Talk's Owain Medford
Hello.
and Sophia Richmond.
Hi.
So, for you guys that still haven't seen the race results, this is very much the place to come. And the big result is that McLaren finally managed to get their first ever victory at the Bahrain Grand Prix after Oscar Piastri converted pole into a victory. And at the same time as well, Owain, this is a victory that Piastri really needed to get this weekend. It's closed that gap between him and Lando Norris up in the championship, and it very much stamps his authority on being a title challenger in 2025.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's had a bit of a rough start to the season so far, particularly, coming off of Japan as well, where, obviously he was stuck behind Norris. McLaren wouldn't switch them over. And, he kind of needed this to sort of assert himself. And make sure that he doesn't get too many points adrift, as just by finishing behind his teammate, obviously. Overcoming that in this race, getting pole and then staying there, and kind of it wasn't a hard race to manage from the front, but he did well with what he had to do. Um, with you would say that some things did sort of luck out for him with the safety car coming when it did during that lap, just coming early enough that he hadn't passed the pits, and obviously didn't have to stick to that delta time for too long, so he didn't lose the gap that he had made, which was the important part. He had made quite a large gap just to his to his teammate at the time, I think. So obviously that. Oh, but no, it wouldn't have been his teammate. I think it was Russell. Sorry, but either way, he'd done the work there, and kind of on a track that's you do have to manage the tires, and obviously he was clean air, but it's not the easiest track to race on, and you can be raced against. But obviously he's lucky to have the fastest car, and I think it's brought a level of confidence. That you can kind of just tell in the way he's answering interview questions, saying I don't think it's right to say that we're not the fastest car, because we are. So I think there's a level of almost of swagger, of braggadociousness to it, that Piastri has now got. And I think maybe he almost thinks, if I was to sort of armchair psychology, he thinks he's got the measure of Norris. So I think this sets up for going forward to be a great battle, which is set up from the fact that he's managed to get this win. So I think it's hugely important, and it's exactly what he needed. And it will really help sort of solidify any challenge that he wants to make on the title.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at their kind of attitudes, particularly after qualifying as well, I mean, you don't want to read too much into it because I think, Lando Norris did actually perform really well during the race for the most part. Very interesting weekend for him on the whole. But in terms of where he recovered from his starting position was impressive. But the attitude of both of them after qualifying was absolute chalk and cheese. I mean, Lando Norris, if anybody's seen the interviews of him after qualifying, he was basically like, yeah, I wasn't good enough. I was slow. Don't know why. Just wasn't good enough. And just very, very short and snappy interviews like that. He was absolutely livid. He was only doing those interviews because he was contractually obliged to do those interviews. He would not have done them if it was his own kind of choice to do so. But saying that's the theory, started in P6 today, and he did end up in P3, right on the coattails of George Russell in the closing stages. But of course, his path to getting there was rather complicated right from the very start.
Oh, definitely. Obviously, with the penalty, false start, out of position, and having Max being Max, calling it straight away on the radio as well. The thing with Lando as well, going back to the qualifying as well, it's so much of a roller coaster with him. 1 minute, obviously, when he has a good qualifying, you can really see his demeanor change. And then, obviously, taking this weekend, for example, like the short one words, being very blunt, it's not sustainable as well for his career. Like, obviously, we know that drivers are going to have bad days. Some days are not going to be good. Some days are going to be really good. But the thing is, the night and day between different weekends, it's not mentally sustainable for him, but also for potentially fans or sponsors or people in general wanting to watch the sport, because it just does not make it as enjoyable to watch. I mean, but his actual race, don't get me wrong, obviously we mentioned with the 5 second penalty as well, which was obviously deserved. It was weird as well because it was saying, is it going to be another 5 second? Because it was like one out position and then one for a false start. But luckily, it was only just a single 5 second penalty. And then towards the last couple of laps, battling with Charles, going back and forth as well. With how it ended, P3, it could have actually been P2, actually, if you really think about it, because obviously you have the investigation with George Russell surrounding the DRS, and people were saying, even the commentators were saying that's going to be a 5 second, maybe even a 10 second penalty. It could have been a good McLaren one, too. Going overall as well, like it's what the constructors need, McLaren needs as a constructors. The drivers' championship, obviously, it's still getting close, and now Oscar coming up into the mix. But the thing is, it is very soon and early on. But this is where consistency and also potentially taking risk will matter at the end of the season as well. So comparing their demeanors both between Oscar and Lando as well, it is very not subtle, very night and day as well because that's again the difference of being like probably extroverted versus introverted as well, where we see obviously Oscar being very subdued in his responses, even when he's had a great win like this one, winning over 15 seconds compared to George in P2. So looking forward to these next couple of races as well. I think that's going to also distinguish where McLaren could see which of the drivers is probably the better opportunity for the drivers championship, but for the constructors, they're absolutely crushing it already.
Yeah, they are absolutely crushing it. I mean, the gap that they have between them and Mercedes, who are in second place, is now nearly 60 points. In fact, if you add Mercedes and Red Bull's points together, you'd only just get McLaren's. That's how much they are in charge of the constructors. But in the drivers, it is tight. It is very, very competitive. Obviously, the two McLaren guys at the top. Norris 3 points ahead of Oscar Piastri. But Max Verstappen, despite being down in sixth place during this Grand Prix, he's still in the frame, very much in third place, just 8 points off the lead. And we can't discount George Russell, and we'll talk a bit about George Russell as well. Another very excellent second place. The one thing I would say I'd be a little bit disappointed with Norris. I mean, obviously, lining up on the wrong place on the grid, that's not great, but these are very fine margins. It's a start. It's difficult. It happens. He's not the only one to do that. I would say, just looking at it, and Owain, you might be able to correct me here because full disclosure, I didn't actually watch the race live. I've just caught it after the fact I've been away this weekend. But it did seem as though, in a sense, Norris was almost too quick, if there's such a thing, coming up behind George Russell, and almost caught himself out going into turn one on the final lap. And had he sort of hung back and just waited for the DRS going down to turn four, he might have been able to get him. And yes, it's still a good recovery getting from sixth to second, but that's 3 points dropped. And come the end of the season, that could be important for the championship.
Yeah, I think the sort of thing that you kind of see from Norris on occasion is that he doesn't have to seem to have maybe such good racecraft at this point in his career, which is one of the things I think you have to that I think the racing drivers have to be taught almost because you see it quite a lot even with Hamilton and things like that. They use it defensively is to actually back off and to realise that you actually need momentum to drive into to get that slipstream, and maybe Norris is obviously trying a bit too eagerly to get the move done or to get as close as possible into turn one, rather than thinking that really you're setting up your move into turn one from way back even at sort of turn 13 and things like that. So you don't want to get them obviously going into turn one because they're just going to get DRS back on you into um, going up to turn four, which is obviously we saw that was a huge overtaking zone that many drivers were using. It's what makes Bahrain so interesting is that you can overtake, particularly into turn four, and it's sort of quite difficult to defend. You can very easily be running someone out of road and incurring a penalty yourself. So the fact that Norris was really wanting to push that braking zone very aggressively, rather than hang back a little bit, as you say, and give yourself the racing room up to be able to affect that overtake. Maybe smacks a little bit of his what I would say the almost a slight immaturity. It's not necessarily a criticism. It's something he'll learn. I'm sure they'll debrief it and say, look, that would have been so much easier. But if it were the other way round, and Piastri was on the sort of he's on the points total he is now, and Norris where he is, those 3 points are going to matter because that's how far they are apart in the championship, and you really have to make sure that those points count. I mean, otherwise you end up with the scenarios we've seen where championships have been decided by less than 1 point, and so you really have to make sure that you're not sort of. I think I think the phrase would be sort of penny wise but pound foolish about those time gaps where as much as getting that 0.1 of a second into that breaking into that one braking zone might be great, but it's gonna cost you so much more going up that straight, and that's the sort of thing he needs to learn because it's gonna matter because it is very very much looking like it's probably going to be McLaren if they maintain this form because it's sort of they're seeming well they are just the team to beat.
They are definitely a team to beat for sure. And like you said, it's a sport of fine margins, is Formula One, and that also goes for the points championship as well. Now, Sophia, I think possibly the biggest surprise this weekend, and something that we spoke about in the preview, and also something we spoke about before recording as well, is the fact that Bahrain was actually a good race, which is a real big relief. Not because the track is disappointing. I've always liked it as a track, and particularly when it's a night race, I mean, seeing all the sparks flying up from the cars after the safety car restart was awesome. I have no problem saying that at all. But it was a really good race. I really enjoyed watching what I've seen of it, and that's despite the thousands upon thousands of laps that were run in testing, albeit in very different conditions. That's maybe why we saw such a good race. But even the tyre choices at times were absolutely bonkers. George Russell coming up to half the race on the softs, which is just something that we never would have seen coming. So this is, I think, is the kind of race that Formula One really needed after Japan.
Definitely. I mean, I hold my hands up. I said in the preview, thought it was going to be really boring just because obviously people are probably going to do more of a data collection over actual racing. But yeah, again, making up for what it was in what happened in Japan. But I will say, while it was interesting to watch, it was only select few laps. I would say there was times where for 10, 12 laps where it was very quiet, nothing going on. However, it also could be because of how we were watching it as well. I was out watching the race with some friends and we were watching it with Sky Sports, and what made it more interesting was the video feed and also the timing tracks and the leaderboard about what was going on and some of the graphics as well. That also made it a lot more interesting as well because everything was speculating. I'll even throw in the safety car that came out. It wasn't really talked about in Sky Sports commentary about why we had a safety car. And then obviously we just saw Sainz's damage, and then we're trying to piece it together what was going on. And then obviously graphics were removed, wrong times about the gaps between the drivers, but going over to that about the strategy as well. Yeah, George Russell going on the softs, and even the hards actually coming off quite quickly than what was expected as well. It was very much a mixed strategy. Some teams splitting the strategies between the drivers, some teams like Ferrari going with both drivers doing the same strategy. I think for Mercedes, with Kimi going on the soft so soon, I think did help understand why they put George on the softs and was able to put the pressure on to keep going to finish P2 on the softs for like 27 laps. But yeah, it was very interesting to see with Bahrain as well. Like you were, again, I said I was expecting it to be kind of a boring race, but then looking at the different strategies, looking at the different calls, obviously that safety car kind of threw in a little bit of a spanner as well to probably some people's ideas and strategies as well, going for the 2 or 3 stop as well. But overall, yeah, it was definitely a great race to watch. I kind of wish we saw a lot more of the battles because, again, on some of the graphics as well, you would see Doohan into P7, but not understand how he was able to overtake these drivers. Gasly finished P6, and it wasn't really covered much of his race. Even the Haas's as well, both of them in the points. Nothing was kind of shown. It was always certain drivers. It was always Lando, Charles, the Ferraris, and then even Oscar wasn't even shown for most of the race either as well. So again, I have a different coverage. Obviously, we were watching it in the UK. It might be different people watching it on F1 TV as well. But yeah, overall, it was a good race. Definitely needed after Japan.
You just reminded me of James Hunt back in the day on commentary when he used to, not even the camera people, not even the TV directors would say for James Hunt in the commentary, and he just said poor camera work and shoddy direction. I think unfortunately we saw some of that when it came to the timing graphics with that, when it comes to that. Very strange at times, but hopefully they will rectify that for Saudi Arabia this coming weekend. But yeah, if you're enjoying this podcast, unlike the camera work on Formula One broadcasters, then why not leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify? Also, if you're listening and aren't currently subscribed to the channel as well, please consider helping us out with a like and subscribe over on YouTube. You can find out when we're going out live next, which we'll be doing so hopefully after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix on Sunday. But yeah, let's talk a bit about Red Bull, Owain, because they are such a hard team to read, really, when it comes to their performance. Max Verstappen obviously winning in Japan last weekend. This weekend, really, really off it in qualifying and in the race. I think Verstappen did pretty well to get sixth. He only managed to get that on the last lap ahead of Pierre Gasly. And it's not even a case of the second Red Bull being miles and miles off. Tsunoda finished a not too bad P9 in the circumstances, but for some reason that car just did not get on with this track. Is this something that's a bit circuit specific? Are we going to expect to see maybe more of this weekend coming up in Saudi Arabia? What's your kind of thoughts on this?
It's a bit weird, isn't it? Because obviously was sort of seemed to be relatively in tune with the car and managed to extract a decent amount of performance from it. Did Max Verstappen in Japan, and it's relatively similar in some ways, where it's a lot of medium speed corners, and then you've got a sort of a couple of long straights. Obviously they're DRS affected, so maybe that changes it um, in the case of Bahrain, but something was not sort of it just he Verstappen just wasn't gelling with the car. It wouldn't stop, it wouldn't turn, it wouldn't. He was having oversteer, he was having understeer. All through practice and even in the race itself, we saw that Verstappen was having to wait for the car to hook up and turn in, and then, as I say, the rear just wouldn't bite in places. It just seemed to have problems kind of everywhere, and I don't know whether that's a tire issue or where they're more suited maybe to the resurfaced first sector of Japan compared to Bahrain, or but did not seem to work for them whatsoever, and we saw sort of the real performance of the car, and I think it's kind of worrying. I mean, they didn't help themselves in any case. I mean, bearing in mind that normally Red Bull is they're the envy of everyone else when it comes to pit stops, and they were messing that up when it comes to apparently it was a wiring issue or something with the automated pit stop pit stop lights that tell them when to go so that they don't do an unsafe release. And then there was an issue with the wheel gun getting the wheel off. It's just something about Red Bull is now, the cracks are showing. And it's so odd to see that when they were in the position that McLaren were, even, last year at this stage. And that's not even to mention 2 years prior, sorry, the two preceding years where, yeah, maybe Ferrari could take it to them, but the rest of the time they've been the best. And it's so weird to see that after four races in 2020, in 2025, where they don't even look like the same team anymore. These are almost amateur mistakes, and like gremlins popping up that we're not used to seeing. I don't know. I can't think of anything that would have caused the kind of issues that they were having. Maybe we didn't see it because it's Tsunoda and they're more trained on Verstappen, but we didn't see those kind of issues for him. But clearly, um, clearly he's within a ballpark of Max's performance. Bearing in mind he's 11 seconds behind at the finish, over 27 laps. We'll just take it from there. Obviously there would have been maybe a few seconds between them, but either way, that's around 0.3 second a lap, let's say, which is super weird to see because you'd imagine Verstappen would be much further ahead. So I do not know what is going on at Red Bull and where they seem to be. They look quite lost, to be perfectly honest, and I don't see it improving in the short term, or even worse. I don't see a consist. We can't even draw a pattern here, and they'll have more data than we do, but I don't think they can either. So it's worrying to see, a team that was in like I say, in McLaren's position is now, struggling so much with not even Verstappen presuming to be able to get a handle on the car, and the team not being able to fix it at any point during the weekend.
Yeah, it's really odd. I mean, even after Max Verstappen qualified down in seventh place, you thought, oh, he's probably going to be challenged by for challenge for the podium by the end at least. He's just he's usually on that level, particularly during the race, but he just absolutely showed no sign of it. And I know it's not as simple as saying Adrian Newey leaving the team is the reason why they're struggling, but the timing is. I mean, you can draw it. There's definitely a correlation there, if not a causation. It's an interesting one for sure. But yeah. Let's talk a bit about George Russell because he's kind of ghosting his way into a championship challenge potentially. Now, we asked a couple weeks back when it was the Chinese Grand Prix. I think I was actually asked this question by Ruby, and she was asking, "Are Mercedes in a title fight?" And frankly, I don't think they are in terms of the Constructors' Championship. I feel like McLaren are really going to take special beating, to be honest with you. But in the drivers right now, Sophia, everybody's saying that Norris and Piastri and Verstappen are all in that battle, but Russell isn't that far off. He's really back in his peak Mr. Consistency days. He's not been outside the top five. He's had 3 podiums in 4 Grand Prix. He couldn't, could he?
I mean, I've said that in one of the previews or even review shows as well. I called it at the start of the season that this is consistency will favor not the top team, and this is exactly what's happening with George. He doesn't need to take risks. He just needs to be consistent, get the points, get podiums, um, and he will slide in with the drivers championship because you're gonna have these top drivers like Lando, Oscar, Max take some of these gambles and these risks. So being with the consistency as well, George has the opportunity to get the drivers championship or even get close to second or third. When it comes again, as you mentioned, with the constructors as well, there is a gap right now. But the thing is, Kimmy's actually not doing too bad as well, and that's going to help the championship as well. Obviously, he placed just out of the points last race in Bahrain, but he was very close battling with Oliver Behrman and a few other drivers to get into like the top 10 as well. So having both of the drivers as well is going to help because if you compare it to Red Bull doesn't have both of the. Well, now that Yuki's come in, that might benefit as well. But the second driver is going to be the key for the Constructors' Championship. McLaren has 2 strong drivers. These other teams, not so much, but the consistency and not taking risks, it's better to get maybe 1 or 2 lower points than to not even get points at all as well. So I think it'll be interesting to see. With George, he will be very consistent and keep it very quiet and make sure that his races as well. He didn't put a foot wrong most of the time. Obviously, the last lap with the battles with Norris was kind of some of the things we saw that were like actual chances and opportunities. But throughout the race as well, he had a quiet race as well to an extent. So because of that, I think we should expect good performances for him, especially coming up into Jeddah, going into these next few races as well, and also seeing what the upgrades of Mercedes will have as well, and how they're going to help with the drivers, and looking at the data as well from how it was in Bahrain from the weekend as well. But yeah, I wasn't shocked because I called it at the beginning, but I'm pleasantly surprised it's been this good so far already. 4 races, technically 5 races into the season.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that Mercedes is looking a lot more consistent as well to go along with Russell's consistency as well. On top of that, last season it was a car that only really seemed to be on the top pace in really cold conditions. But we've seen during a few Grand Prix so far this season, including Bahrain, of course, where it's been rather hot, and it's still been competitive, which I think is really positive for them as a whole. Owain, they've found a bit of. They were just talking about Red Bull losing consistency. Mercedes have found more consistency, and George Russell has that consistency. The only thing that's really kind of letting them down in a sense to an extent, and I say that in terms of pure points. Obviously, Antonelli's done amazingly well so far this season on the whole. If they had 2 George Russells effectively, they would be up there with McLaren. They're not that far off really. So it's very encouraging for Mercedes because I personally wasn't really expecting them to make this kind of big ground, especially with a big regs change in 26. But that car's looking decent.
Yeah, the Mercedes is looking really good. I mean, I think the only reason that they missed out on a double points finish for the race for Bahrain is that they pit Antonelli during the safety car. Now it's kind of up for debate. I think maybe obviously they knew from Antonelli's first stint what the pace and the deg on the softs was. Um, then they've obviously used that to make the decision for Russell and Antonelli, obviously himself, to go for a second set um, of used softs. But the thing is, he'd only done a few laps on them, and I'm not saying that he would have made it to the end of the race, but at least I think it would have at least been worth it to try. I mean, it's a big ask, let's be honest. I mean, they got caught out with that second pit stop, and trying to go for the third, I think, was maybe where they went wrong. But they were, as you say, super quick. They were holding their own, and I really think the Mercedes was on balance, on average, probably the second fastest car. I don't know whether the data supports that, but just sort of looking at it visually, anecdotally, it looks like it was the second fastest car compared to the McLarens. I mean, I think the Ferraris at times were slightly faster, but across the whole race stint, the Mercedes were more performant, and I think Antonelli is kind of in the position that George Russell was a few years ago. Is that he's still you got to remember, like, he's done a load of testing mileage, but the guy's still a rookie and he looks incredibly quick, but he's still learning. And at a certain point, you got to account for that and see that he's maybe going to have a slightly peakier performance with a slightly more troughs in them in where he's going to finish. But I think they kind of did put him up the river a little bit by doing that second stop, and at least maybe that third stop, and maybe if they'd given Antonelli the chance, we'd be sat here talking about a great finish for Antonelli, because he lost so many places as a result of that, with 60 seconds basically. Well, it's probably more like 50, sorry, with the safety car, but 50 seconds worth of pit stop that he, with 20 seconds of it, he didn't really need to take. So I think that Antonelli sort of, if they allowed him to try for that track position, to take the track position and take the softs to the end, then he might have had a much better job rather than having to fight through the field with time that he was probably never going to make up. But it's really looking good for Mercedes to be in such a good position at this stage of the season.
Yeah, definitely, without a doubt. I mean, Antonelli just missing out on points in the end, P11 for him. But he'll have his good days and have his bad days. Whether it's him making a mistake or his team making a mistake, it can happen to any of them. And yeah, he's learning in the car. He's learning out of the car. He's still not finished school, as we've managed a few times on this show, which just blows my mind. Really, being a Formula One driver and finishing his A levels, or whatever the Italian equivalent of it is over there, absolutely incredible stuff. And speaking of Italy, Ferrari. Let's talk about Ferrari. Now, they didn't manage to get a podium, unfortunately, for them during this Grand Prix, but they were only just off of it. They looked a lot more competitive. That new floor seems to be not really the silver bullet. They're not back challenging for wins or anything, but definitely a step in the right direction for them, Sophia. Charles Leclerc in fourth place and Hamilton in fifth. Leclerc only just missing out on that podium, of course, with Norris's late surge there. I mean, it's not really right to say that our Ferrari back, but I think Ferrari have probably got on top of their car a bit more. They can run it as low as what it should be, because especially around a track like Bahrain, which we saw last weekend, if you're running a high ride height around there, you're going to be mincemeat on the straights. And thankfully, we didn't see that.
Definitely. I mean, it's definitely a step forward. You can even see in Hamilton's interviews afterwards as well, saying how this upgrade has helped the team. And we knew it was never going to be a night and day fix with this floor coming in, but to see this slow progression and the battles going on, Hamilton had a few battles this weekend in Bahrain, and obviously Charles with Lando in the last couple of laps as well. So again, this kind of comes back into the conversation of the consistency as well, because having this new floor and kind of running it the way that Lewis likes it, and obviously Charles kind of has a little bit of a similar driving pattern as Lewis as well. I think this is going to benefit them going forward. Had they brought this in sooner, we probably would have seen a different outcome. Definitely, obviously, I would even say that it probably wouldn't even lead to one of the disqualifications in China as well, which is the crucial points needed in both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship. It'll be interesting seeing in Jeddah as well, because it is a high-speed track as well. And with sometimes upgrades might obviously work with some tracks and some not. And given Bahrain, all the testing, all the data, comparing it as well will help to see, is this new floor actually the best for the races or for certain tracks, or is it going to be kind of special one-off situations? One thing as well with the races is some of the calls that they've done about the tire strategies was a little bit interesting. They were one of the few teams that did both drivers with the same tire strategies, even though they were both close to each other in the grid, which I was kind of surprised with. Normally, you would probably expect maybe to do one have a gamble compared to the other as well, but the fact that they did double stack pit stops and both running the same kind of tires, I was a little bit shocked, but it was kind of damage limitations though as well because they both had both of the drivers in the top five with crucial points both in the drivers and constructors championship. But yeah, I was expecting a bit more, and obviously we might see hopefully some changes of strategy, changes of calls with Jeddah. Obviously, anything can really happen in that race. Let's be honest. And so much has kind of gone on over the last 3 4 years of racing there. But yeah, not even damage limitations, but it's a step forward, but it's not going to be the final step. I'm hoping some of the new upgrades that they'll have, probably not obviously in Jeddah, but in a few other races coming down the line, will also help alongside this floor upgrade that took place last weekend.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. I mean, Ferrari will always want more. You know, the oldest and most successful team in Formula One. They want to be winning every single Grand Prix, every single championship. That's just what they want. That's their goal. It has to be their goal. But yeah, it's an interesting point you make about the pitch strategy there, and it's something that I know Owain wants to kind of weigh in on as well. I mean, I'll ask you directly, Owain. Do you think that Ferrari kind of messed up a chance to get a podium in Bahrain?
Oh, 100%. Obviously, Leclerc started, I believe, in second place on the grid, and I think obviously didn't do so well off the start, and they got a bit shuffled backwards. Um, but the real changing point was that first pit stop, where obviously they double stacked, and they both went onto the mediums, and I think the Ferrari seems to work better in colder conditions. That's what we've seen thus far. It was hot in Japan, and they were and they were much faster in the early portions of Shanghai of the weekend, where it was a bit cooler than the later portions where it warmed up. So very clearly they seem to work better in colder conditions. But there was a middle portion of the race where I genuinely thought, you know what, we could be on for a Ferrari win here. They do seem to have that kind of pace on these medium tires this second set, and I really think that running into going into that when that safety car was pulled out, um, I am baffled that they even tried. I believe they were talking about a plan that maybe used the soft, and Ferrari did not decide to do that. They instead opted for the hards, which I think would have been maybe a better choice a few laps earlier. But by that point, we were on half race distance, or just over, sorry. But with a lot of fuel burned off. So, approaching a sprint again, which is also where the Ferrari seems to be much faster. And they put the hards on, and I know there's high deg and yeah, I know there's high deg in Bahrain, but you have to look at the other teams that didn't do that. Behrman used that strategy, used the strategy with the softs at the end, as did Sonoda, as did Russell, as did Antonelli even, which is what allowed him to make that recovery. But they all managed, sorry, Lawson as well, all managed to make 27 laps on a on a soft set of tires on a very abrasive racetrack. And Behrman used it to great effect to go from last to getting the points. Um, I think if Ferrari had made use of that, they themselves would have been able to, if not if not get the win, at least make a challenge for the podium without having to rely on the FIA taking a dim view of Russell's use of the DRS when he shouldn't have done, and instead they ended up in a decent position, particularly for Hamilton, but Leclerc lost out 2 places there, and I think that this is something that they need to keep an eye on because the opportunity was there to even get on the podium, get a double podium, have a fight, take the fight to McLaren, and they haven't managed to do it. I genuinely think they threw away a much better set of points that they could have achieved than the ones they did because a certain like I say, in that middle stint they were electric and they seem to have gone conservative at just the wrong point.
Shall we do some good old plugging of the social medias and everything away? I did mention it a little bit ago, I do believe, but where can you find more from Grid Talk on the social medias?
Yeah, it's a slightly longer one for us, but I would so because of that, I will just remind you that if you'd like to engage with us on social media, then come and find us at Grid Talk UK on all of the social media platforms with the app. You can come and talk to us. You can tell us that we're wrong, tell us that we're delusional, tell us that I'm an idiot for predicting every single thing I did for Bahrain because it all went completely nuts. You know what? Looking back on it, I was completely wrong. But if you'd like to come and tell us that, then yeah, that's at Grid Talk UK on all of the social media platforms with the at.
Yeah, what else is the comments section for? Sophia, anything you want to promote?
Yeah, I do small clips about Formula 2, Formula 3, and F1 Academy on Formula Reports this weekend, where F1 Academy is back racing in Jeddah, and obviously F2 will be taking place as well. So you can find us on all social media at Formula Reports, website as well, MSN, and all that.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Sophia very much covering for me in a sense by getting some race report action from the junior categories. My F1 race review has just gone live though on Formula Reports. If you want to see some more from me, you can head over there as well. But yeah, thank you very much for listening or watching this podcast. Grid Talk is also available on YouTube, where most of our episodes are recorded live, especially those race review shows, as well as Amazon Fire, Spotify, Apple Music, Verbal, and Pocket Cast. Just search for F1 Grid Talk for our big back catalogue of shows with previews and reactions to the race results. A huge thank you to Jared, Bradley, and Holly Eagle for supporting us even further on Patreon. If you want us to support us even more, you can head over there, get some exclusive member benefits, including our Beyond the Grid Talk podcast, which is a Patreon exclusive. So also be sure to be subscribed to the YouTube channel as well to know when we're going live with our next weekly episode. And thank you very much for listening to the Grid Talk podcast, and goodbye.